It was early afternoon when I arrived at our home, an old two-story farmhouse nestled in the Kansas countryside, surrounded by vast fields of wheat and alfalfa. And no, before you ask, I'm not a farmer. I wouldn't know one end of a tractor from the other. The fields are owned by someone else, thankfully. My name is Bill Jacobs, and you might have come across my work. I'm an art critic whose weekly articles are syndicated in about 200 newspapers nationwide and featured on several major websites. I do most of my work from this charming country house that my wife of 8 years and I decided to make our home. I do spend some time traveling, usually 1 to 3 days a week, depending on what I'm writing about. My wife, Denise, works as a surgeon at the county hospital located in what the locals call a town. Don't get me wrong, they are good people, honest, hard-working and family-oriented, the kind who look you in the eye when they shake your hand. But the town isn't quite what I'm used to after having lived most of my life in Southern California. I met Denise at an art exhibit in Los Angeles, which I was covering for the newspaper. She was there taking a break from her medical studies, as she was finishing her degree at the time. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. I was analyzing a piece of art, jotting down notes, when she approached me. "That's an interesting piece," she said. "Do you think so?" I asked. "Yes, I do," she replied. "What are your thoughts?" I responded. "Personally, I've seen more thought-provoking work done by 6-year-olds with crayons." She asked if I disliked abstract art. "I like abstract art just fine," I said, "but this isn't abstract, it's lazy. It looks like something done by an artist who hasn't sold anything in months and just splashed some paint on a canvas, hoping to sell it with a fancy explanation about inner conflict. He'll probably sell it, but I wouldn't pay a dime for it." She asked if I was an art buyer. "No, I'm a critic," I said, introducing myself. "Bill Jacobs, Denise Blackman," she replied, shaking my hand. "A real art critic?" she asked with a laugh. "Yep," I said. "I get paid real money to write terrible things about art like this. Some artists even think it's an honor to be criticized." By me, she laughed, saying it sounded like an interesting job. I shrugged. "It can be, but most of the time it's just me at a computer." "What about you?" "I'm a medical student," she said. "I'll start my residency next year now." "That sounds exciting," I told her. "It's all work and no play," she said. "That's why I'm here. I needed a break," I nodded in understanding. "If you want to see real art, take a look at that piece over there," I said, pointing to a painting of a snow-covered farmhouse. What do you think? She gazed at it, her face lighting up. "It reminds me of where I grew up in Kansas," she said. "I love how the moonlight reflects off the house." "Are you sure it's moonlight?" I asked. "Stand in front of it and see what you think." She moved closer, and I followed. "It looks so different from here," she observed. "Indeed," I said. "The brushstrokes and color blending change the perspective based on where you stand. You notice details here that you wouldn't have seen from over there." "You're right," she said. "I like this. Congratulations, you're now an art critic," I joked. "Oh no," she laughed. "I could never do what you do. I'd be too worried about hurting someone's feelings." We spent the next 2 hours exploring the rest of the exhibit, and I enjoyed hearing her opinions on various pieces. I hated to see her leave, but she had to get back to her studies. Before she left, we exchanged numbers and emails. "It's been great meeting you, Bill," she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. "I'd love to do this again sometime." "So would I told her. Over the following months, we got to know each other better and began dating exclusively. I initially worried that our 6-year age gap might bother her, but it didn't. She made me feel younger, and before long, we were married. I felt like I'd won the jackpot. Denise was, and still is, a warm and loving woman, and our intimacy was not just good, it was incredible. She never complained about my work schedule or when I had to travel for exhibits. Just as I didn't mind her long and unpredictable hours during her 5-year residency, where she often worked late or after-hours shifts depending on the demands of her job. We talked about this from the beginning, and I had no issue with her irregular schedule, even though it often made it hard for us to connect in the evenings or on weekends. After her residency, she was offered a position at the hospital in her hometown, which had just opened a new surgical center so locals wouldn't have to travel hundreds of miles for surgery. By then, I was already syndicated, so my physical location didn't matter much. The internet was my workspace, and I could send my articles from anywhere with a web connection. So we packed our belongings, sold the condo, and moved to Kansas. Our new home was a 2-story farmhouse, supposedly dating back to the 19th century, though it had been fully updated with modern amenities, including central air. I made sure the house had cable and high-speed internet, essential for my work. We converted one bedroom on the second floor into my office, and we planned to use the third bedroom as a nursery. The master bedroom was spacious, complete with a well-equipped master bath that could comfortably accommodate us both. The biggest adjustment for me was the darkness of the country nights. It was pitch black, you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face, completely different from the brightly lit nights of the city. What I loved most, though, was the night sky. I had never seen so many stars in my life. I used to have a small telescope as a kid and loved stargazing, but this was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Noticing my fascination with the night sky, Denise surprised me with a nice 8-inch telescope complete with all the accessories needed for taking photos. Naturally, I expressed my gratitude that night in bed many times. It took me a while to master astrophotography. It's much more involved than just pointing a camera and snapping a shot, but I eventually got the hang of it. Soon my office was filled with pictures of planets, galaxies, and brightly colored nebulae. Denise even took some of my photos to decorate her own office. The best part for me, though, was the nights Denise and I would sit out back with the telescope. After stargazing for a while, we would often make love right there under the night sky, feeling like we were on top of the world. The first 7 years of our marriage were, at least from my perspective, perfect. I had a fulfilling job, a beautiful home, and a loving wife. What more could a man ask for? We even began talking about having children. Denise had been on birth control and wanted to wait until she was more established in her career, which I respected. Then I began noticing small changes in her. Her work hours grew longer and more unpredictable, and she became easily irritated over trivial things, leading to arguments about the most ridiculous issues. I assumed it was job stress and chose not to say much. One year, she was invited to attend a medical conference in Wichita. The conference was scheduled for 5 days, starting on a Monday. She seemed tense and unsettled before leaving, but wouldn't tell me why. The night before she left, I tried to be intimate, but she declined, complaining of a headache. The next day she left, promising to call me each night. That same week, I had a major exhibit to cover in New York, and after reviewing my schedule, I realized I could meet her in Wichita that Friday and return home with her. I hoped she'd appreciate the surprise. The exhibit went smoothly, and I managed to complete my article by the deadline. Denise did call each night as promised, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't really interested in talking. I decided to keep my Friday plans a secret, thinking we might even spend the weekend together. I arrived at her hotel and searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. After confirming my identity, the hotel staff informed me she hadn't checked out and might still be in one of the ongoing seminars, so I gave her a call. "Are you all right, Bill?" she asked quietly when she answered. "Yes," I said. "I thought I'd surprise you on my way back from New York. I figured we could spend the weekend here and head home together. Where are you? Are you in a seminar?" "Yes, I am," she replied, sounding annoyed. I heard someone in the background, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Denise muffled the phone, clearly trying to keep me from hearing her response, and I couldn't help but wonder why. After a few moments, she uncovered the phone and said, "Sweetie, that's so thoughtful of you, but I won't be much company right now. Why not?" I asked. "Well, I've been invited to observe a few procedures at the local hospital by the head of surgery, so I'll be staying another day or two. I didn't find out about it until a couple of hours ago. I'm sorry, but I'll be home by Sunday night, and we can make it up then." "Yeah, okay." I told her, "I've just missed you all week. I miss you too," she replied. "Please go home and I'll see you Sunday night, okay?" she promised. "Okay," I said. "See you then." Love you too," she said. She didn't immediately hang up, and I thought I heard her say something about dodging a bullet. I might not have heard her correctly, but that's how it sounded. I headed back to the airport and caught a flight home. Saying I was upset would be an understatement. For the first time in our marriage, I started to question if she was being unfaithful. Denise did get back on Sunday, though technically it was early Monday at about 2:30 a.m. She moved quietly, trying not to wake me, but I was already awake. She put her luggage in the closet and went into the bathroom, reappearing a few minutes later wearing a long robe before climbing into bed. I couldn't help but notice the distinct smells of cigar smoke, aftershave, and something else. When she tried to cuddle next to me, I mumbled, "Please take a shower." "You smell like an ashtray. I'm too tired to take a shower," she said. "Fine," I replied, getting up. "I'll go sleep on the couch." I grabbed my pillow and a blanket and went downstairs. I barely slept that night, drifting off a few times. I got up at 8 when Denise stumbled into the kitchen to make coffee. I thought you were coming home yesterday, I said. I'm sorry, she replied, wiping sleep from her eyes. I could still smell cigars and aftershave, so I kept my distance. It took longer than I planned, and I had trouble getting a flight last night. Why were you in such a bad mood when I came in, she asked. Sorry. You know how sensitive I am to smells, I said. I could smell cigar smoke and aftershave all over you this morning. What were you doing, doctor? Banstead took a smoke break on the way to the airport, she explained. I didn't even think you might smell it on me and the aftershave, I asked. Was that his probably, she said. You must have been awfully close to have it all over you, I pointed out. He gave me a goodbye hug when he dropped me at the airport, she said. That must have been some hug, I told her. Look, nothing happened. All right, she snapped. You're being really defensive over something that supposedly didn't happen, I said. I just asked a simple question, you're right. She said. I'm sorry. I was exhausted and too tired to even think about a shower when I got home, so what's your schedule like, I asked. I don't need to be at the hospital until 11 today. I'm meeting our new head of surgery and then have a couple of procedures this afternoon. I'll probably be home late, all right? I'll order pizza, I said. I'd better get to it and see what my week looks like. Bill, Denise said as I turned to go upstairs. I'm really sorry we didn't connect this weekend, me too, I said with a wry smile. Maybe next weekend, as predicted. Denise didn't get home until after 8 p.m., and of course she was exhausted. I didn't complain much since I knew how hard she worked. I had an exhibit to review in Denver that week, so between that and her erratic schedule, we barely saw each other. We managed to spend some time together over the weekend, but I sensed something else was on Denise's mind. About a month later, Denise announced we were invited to a hospital function to introduce the new regional director. I got my best suit cleaned and went with her to the event. Denise looked stunning in a black dress that highlighted her figure. It wasn't revealing, but still looked great. I was proud to have her on my arm at dinner that night. That's when I met the new regional director, Dr. George Banstead. He approached us when we arrived. He seemed slightly older than me, with a full head of dark hair streaked with grey at the temples. He filled out his suit nicely and looked like he worked out. He was about 3 inches taller than me and at least 20 pounds heavier, mostly muscle. I immediately recognized his aftershave and the faint smell of cigar smoke lingering around him. This must be the renowned art critic, Bill Jacobs, he said, extending his hand. I've heard a lot about you. In fact, I have you to thank for saving me from making a bad decision. How's that, I asked. Well, your article on that exhibit in Washington, D.C., a few years ago, he explained. My wife and I were considering buying a couple of pieces from that show, but after reading your review, we changed our minds. Glad to be of service, I said. I assume you know my wife from that conference in Wichita? Yes, she's quite a woman, he replied. I noticed the way they looked at each other and wondered if there was more going on. Yes, I agree, I said. She's quite the surgeon. I have big plans for her, and I'm sure she'll rise to the occasion, he said, looking at her. Denise's face turned red, and I wondered what could have embarrassed her like that. The evening went well. Dinner was pleasant, and we listened to speeches praising Dr. Banstead for his community contributions. Afterward, we were free to enjoy the open bar and dance floor. Denise and I danced several times, and she also danced with Dr. Banstead. As they danced, it seemed like they were closer than appropriate. More than once, he whispered something to Denise that made her laugh. She glanced at me a couple of times after he spoke, and I wondered what they were discussing. He returned her to me, making a show of offering her hand. I think it's only fitting that the good doctor has the last dance with her husband, he said with a smirk. I thanked him and took Denise's hand. I held her close as we danced, and I noticed the smell of cigar smoke and aftershave on her. I wondered if this was how she got his scent on her in Wichita. Finally, the dance ended, and we left. Looking around, I saw Banstead leaving alone and wondered where his wife was. I noticed George was alone tonight, I said. What happened to his wife? He said she wasn't feeling well enough to come, Denise replied. Denise commented that I seemed to get along well with him, and I asked, do I have anything to worry about? Absolutely not, she replied. You're the only one I love. I'm glad to hear that, I said. And you're the only one I love. So what are these big plans he has for you? She explained. There's talk about having surgeons travel to perform procedures at various hospitals in the region, and I'm on the list. I see, I said, though it felt like he had something else planned. I don't know what that. Would be, she said. I had never caught her in a lie before, but something didn't feel right about all of this, so I decided to drop it until I knew more. Things were tense over the next couple of months. Denise's schedule got even worse. She was placed on a team that required her to travel to clinics and hospitals across the state, and I never knew when she'd be working. We hardly saw each other, and when we did, it was just brief hellos and goodbyes. Frustrated. I tried to get her to adjust her schedule so we could spend more time together, but it seemed she was more focused on advancing her career than on us. Something about the whole situation didn't pass my gut instinct as a reporter. I briefly considered hiring a private investigator, but two things held me back. First, if she was innocent, she'd be furious at me for spying on her, and rightfully so. Second, I didn't want to waste a lot of money just to find out there was nothing going on. Luckily, I had several friends who were investigative reporters, something Denise wasn't aware of, so I reached out to a few of them to see if they could dig up any dirt on Dr. Banstead and his traveling medical show. I was in Seattle reviewing an exhibit when I got a call from Denise telling me she'd be in Topeka for the weekend for a meeting. I was at my wit's end with all of this and had to control my temper. I'm sorry. I know you were hoping for us to spend some time together when you got back from Seattle this weekend. I'll make it up to you if only I had a nickel for every time I'd heard that. I counted to 10 before replying. Bill, she asked when I didn't respond. Are you there? I'm here. Who else is attending this meeting? Well, Dr. Banstead, she said. Of course, I thought. There are also a few others from my hospital and from other hospitals in the state, all right. You gotta do what you gotta do. I'm not happy about it, but I understand you're the best. I love you, she said. Love you too, I replied before ending the call. This nonsense has to end, I thought as I put my phone away. I finished reviewing the exhibit and headed back to my hotel. As I was eating, my phone rang again. It was Ralph Williams, a friend who works as a reporter for the Kansas City Star. Hello, I said. Hey, Bill. How's it going? Yep, I said, making him chuckle. That good? He asked sarcastically. Pretty much. Did you find something? I sure did. Your Dr. George Banstead is quite a character. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I asked. Well, let's just say he's richer than God, married to a trophy wife who despises him, knows everyone worth knowing, and has a notorious reputation as a womanizer. He's particularly fond of married women, if you catch my drift. Unfortunately, I do, I said. Word is he's currently seeing a cute blonde surgeon from the middle of the state, he added, making my heart drop. Do you know who this blonde surgeon is? I asked. No, I don't, but she's a real Kansas farm girl, as cute as a button from the photos I saw. Photos? You have photos? Yeah, sure do. They were spotted at a healthcare professionals gathering here a few weeks back. Looked pretty cozy. If you ask me, could you email me some of those photos? I asked. Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Ralph. I really appreciate it anytime, old friend. By the way, it turns out the good doctor was involved in a scandal out west a few years ago. What kind of scandal? I asked. The kind that gets prominent doctors quietly pushed out the door, if you know what I mean. I don't have all the details, but I know someone who does. I'll send you her contact info with the photos. She writes for a society gossip blog out in California, and she's expecting your call. Thanks, I said before hanging up. I remembered Denise mentioning she had a meeting in Kansas City a month ago, but she never said anything about being with George. I heard my phone ping with an email notification. Dreading what I might see, I opened the email and looked at the photos, expecting the worst. Sure enough, there was Denise sitting in a hotel restaurant with George Banstead. One photo showed them kissing, and another had them walking away holding hands. This was far from a professional relationship. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How long had this been going on? Was she in love with him? How could she do this to us? So many questions ran through my mind, and I couldn't think straight. I had one more call to make, so I dialed the number Ralph had given me for Linda Carson, the blogger. Linda Carson, she said when she answered. I introduced myself and explained that Ralph had referred me to her. Yes, I've been expecting your call. You want to know about George Banstead? Yeah, what can you tell me? Well, he got caught fooling around with a college student in his office about 8 or 9 years ago. That got him kicked out, and now I hear he's in Kansas. Do you know the student's name? I asked. Yes, I do, but it never made it into my report. The school was very insistent that her name be kept out of the story. Let me look it up. Ah, here it is, Denise Blackman. I felt nauseous and asked, Are you certain? Absolutely. Why? Do you recognize her? She replied. That's my wife's maiden name? When did this happen, I asked. I'm sorry to hear that. Hold on, let me check my notes. Here it is, she said, giving me the date. I pulled up the archive of my day planner and checked it was the same day I first met her at the exhibit. Damn. I thanked Linda for the information and ended the call. Somehow I managed to get through dinner and then went to my room to finish my article for the week. I submitted it just in time, packed up, and decided to check out and head home. I needed answers, but none came to mind. I prayed that this situation would resolve and we could move on. I hoped this wasn't as bad as it seemed. I arrived home early Friday afternoon, grabbed the mail from the box by the road, and went inside. The house felt unusually quiet, even more than normal. I put away my clothes and sorted through the mail bills went in one pile for Denise and me to review together, as we always did, and the obvious junk went straight into the trash. Among the pile was a beige envelope addressed to me in elegant calligraphy from a place called Raemier Gallery. I'd never heard of it, so I opened the letter. The invitation was for an exclusive showing at 5 p.m. that evening. The address was local, which struck me as odd since I didn't know of any art gallery in town. Perhaps it was new, and the owner wanted to give me a preview. What the hell? I thought it would help take my mind off Denise for a bit. I pulled up to a large 2-story Victorian house right at 5 and was surprised when the door opened before I could knock. Standing there was a slim, petite blonde who looked no older than 25. "Mr. Jacobs, right on time. I appreciate punctuality. Please come in," she said. I followed her inside, and after closing the door she turned to me. "My name is Adrestia Ramia. Welcome to my gallery," she said, extending her hand. "A pleasure to meet you." "I didn't know this little town had an art gallery," I said. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Trust me, Mr. Jacobs, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world, please. Call me Bill," I said. "All right, Bill, and you can call me Adrestia or Dr. A." "Adrestia, that's an interesting name. I've been called many things over the years. Please feel free to look around if you'd like," she said. I took her up on the offer and began to explore the portraits on the walls. Each had an eerie, near-photographic quality, depicting people in moments facing their inevitable end. It was the most macabre collection I'd ever seen. I examined them, trying to figure out who the artist was, but the markings in the lower right corner were impossible to decipher. I found myself standing before a portrait of a woman appearing to fall backward, her eyes wide and her hair flying in front of her face. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, capturing the moment she realized her fate. "This is a rather strange collection," I said. "Do you sell many of these? These aren't for sale, they're for posterity." "This is one of our most recent additions. They look incredibly lifelike." "Who painted them?" I asked. "Some of them painted themselves," she replied. I stared at her, shocked. "How is that even possible?" I asked. "If these aren't for sale, how do you keep the gallery open? Money isn't an issue." "Let's just say we have very deep pockets," she said. After a few awkward moments, she spoke again. "I understand you thought I invited you here for a review," she said. "Isn't that why you sent me the invitation?" I asked. She smiled and shook her head. "No, that's not it. I'm sorry if you got the wrong impression. Actually, I have something here just for you. Please follow me." I followed her through double doors into a room with a covered portrait on an easel and 2 chairs with a small table between them. "Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair on the right side of the table. I sat and watched as she walked to the portrait and removed the cover. To say I was stunned would be an understatement. There, in the painting, was Denise, dressed in a seductive black dress showing plenty of cleavage. Her hair was styled beautifully, and her nails were painted a deep red. I noticed her rings were missing from her left hand, which rested on top of another hand. Belonging to, you guessed it, George Banstead. She gazed at George with a look I knew all too well, a look I'd seen countless times since we first met. I leaned back in the chair, overwhelmed. But this was a painting, not a photo. How could it have been done so quickly? I wondered if this was real or some kind of cruel joke. "Is this real? What kind of sick joke is this?" I demanded, staring at the portrait. "No, it's not a joke. You're probably wondering if this is really happening," Adrestia said, as if reading my mind. "Trust me, it's real. I can't explain it in a way that would make sense to you, but it is real." She covered the portrait and sat in the chair next to me. "I know this is a horrible shock to you," she said. I nodded, feeling numb. "Yes," I stammered. "I also know you've been suspecting your wife of cheating for some time, but haven't found any solid proof," she continued. How would you know that I asked? It's my job to know, she answered. Who the hell is this woman? I wondered. She smiled, almost as if she could read my thoughts. Please return at 11 p.m. tonight. Your questions will finally be answered, she said. Numb, I got up, and she guided me to the front door. Remember 11 p.m. tonight, she reminded me. I nodded and left. Back home, I tried to eat and distract myself from thoughts of what Denise might be doing, but it was impossible. I considered having a beer, but decided I wanted a clear head when I returned to the gallery. I watched some TV and tried to take a short nap. I eventually dozed off and woke up just in time to brush my teeth and head back to the gallery. As I reached the door, it opened before I could knock, and Adrestia motioned for me to come in. I followed her into the private viewing room, where I sat down, and she pulled the cover off the portrait. I was stunned to see Denise naked, straddling George Banstead. What kind of sorcery is this, I asked, bewildered as I looked at Adrestia. Please follow me to my office, she said. I got up and followed her upstairs. Upon entering her office, I noticed shelves lined with what appeared to be ancient books and scrolls, a computer monitor on her desk, and a large screen mounted on the wall. She prepared a cup of tea, handed it to me, and sat down behind her desk. I took a sip, and oddly enough, I felt slightly better. What's happening? How could that portrait have changed, I asked. Maybe this will help you understand, she said, moving her mouse around until the wall monitor flickered to life. I watched in shock as Denise rode George with enthusiasm. I could see his erect penis filling her as she ground down on him, and when she lifted herself, I noticed white streaks on his shaft, confirming that he had finished inside her without protection. She lifted her leg and lay beside him, his semen leaking from her. Oh God, that was incredible, George said. Denise laughed. Yeah, it was amazing, sweetie. The best, she replied. Do you think I got you pregnant tonight? He asked. Possibly. I stopped taking my birth control and made sure Bill hasn't been intimate with me lately, she said. He chuckled. Think he'll believe the baby is his, he asked. I hope so, she replied. Why do you stay with that loser, he questioned. Why do you stay with your wife, she countered. You think he suspects anything, George asked. No, he doesn't. He buys whatever I tell him, she answered. I had seen and heard enough. I watched as she picked up her phone from the nightstand, so I decided to call her. I saw her phone light up as the call went through, but she glanced at the screen, declined the call, and put it back down. Who was that, George asked. Probably Bill, he just got back from Seattle. Now come over here and be with me again, she said. George started to move on top of her, but I called her phone once more, interrupting them. Denise grabbed the phone, declined the call again, and tossed it back onto the nightstand, flipping her middle finger at the screen. Why did you do that, George asked. Because he's pissing me off, she replied. I was about to search for the number to their hotel when Adrestia handed me a slip of paper. Here's the number to their hotel. They're staying in room 625, registered as Dr. and Mrs. George Banstead, she said. Furious, I thanked her and called the hotel. When the receptionist answered, I asked to be connected to room 625. I heard the room phone ring in the video, and George picked up the receiver. Hello, he said. Put my wife on the phone right now, I snarled as I watched. He looked at the receiver and handed it to Denise. It's for you, he said quietly. Denise took the phone, and I could tell she was not happy. Hello, she said softly. Well, hello there, Mrs. Banstead, I replied. Her face turned pale on the screen. Having a good time, I see, Bill. Nothing is happening. Why are you so upset? Why are you having sex with Banstead? Why did you register as Mrs. Banstead? Did you divorce me without telling me, I demanded. Bill, nothing happened, she insisted. Bull, I shot back. She flinched at my words, unaccustomed to hearing me swear. I just watched the two of you. Did you really think you could get pregnant with his baby and pass it off as mine? Are you out of your mind, you saw us, Denise asked, looking around the room, probably searching for a camera. Yes, I saw you and I heard you. How long has this been going on? I know you and he were involved in college, and I know you got caught the day we first met. So tell me, why, I demanded. Bill, I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong. This is the first time anything has happened between us, she said. Please let me come home, and we can work this out. This doesn't have to end our relationship. There's nothing for you to come home to, you liar. You might as well stay with him. I'm seeing an attorney on Monday, and you'll be served with divorce papers, I stated coldly. I don't want a divorce. Please don't do this. I love you, she pleaded. Yeah, I can see how much you love me. "Don't bother coming back, I never want to see your face again as long as I live," I said, and ended the call. I watched as she handed the phone back to George, tears streaming down her face. "I've got to go," she said, scrambling to dress. "I need to fix this with Bill," why George asked. "I heard him on the phone, he's divorcing you." "That frees you up," he said. She shook her head. "I've got to make things right with him," she insisted. George got up and said, "Then I'll drive you." "You're in no state to drive, and who knows what he'll do to you." "Bill would never hurt me," she replied. "Under normal circumstances, probably not, but he just caught you cheating. There's no telling how he'll react. Does he own a gun?" George asked. She shook her head. "No, he doesn't," she said. "Still, I'm driving you home, and that's final," he insisted. We watched as they got dressed, packed up, and left the room. I noticed her rings were still sitting on the nightstand where she had left them. I turned to Adrestia and asked, "How did you manage to get that camera into their room?" "Trade secret," she replied. "Did you mean what you said about never wanting to see her again?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes," I answered. She closed her eyes briefly before speaking. "Very well. You should go home and try to get some rest, maybe I said. She placed her hands on my head, and I felt a warm, calming sensation wash over me. "But things will get better. Trust me," she said, and oddly enough, I did. I left her office and went home. Denise was right, I didn't own a gun, but I did have a good Louisville slugger. I lay down on the couch, setting the bat on the floor next to me. I woke to the sound of loud knocking on the front door. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m. I wondered if it was Denise and George, but was surprised to see a Kansas State trooper standing on my porch. "Mr. Jacobs?" the officer asked. "William Jacobs." "Yeah, I'm Bill Jacobs," I replied. "I'm sorry to inform you, sir, but your wife is dead," he said. "Dead? How?" When I asked, stunned. "She was in a car owned by Dr. George Banstead when they encountered a freak tornado on the highway. The trooper who saw it said the tornado struck, lifted the car, and slammed it to the ground about half a mile away. No one survived." "I'm sorry, sir. Her body has been taken to the county morgue." "Thank you," I said, feeling numb. I wondered if Adrestia had anything to do with it, but quickly dismissed the idea. How could she have summoned a tornado out of nowhere? I showered, got dressed, and headed to the county morgue to identify Denise. While there, I spoke to the trooper who had reported the incident. "Strangest thing I've ever seen," he said. There wasn't even a cloud in the sky. The tornado just appeared out of thin air, picked the car up like it was nothing, smashed it down a half-mile away, and then vanished. The whole thing took just a few seconds. "Sorry for your loss." I nodded. "Thanks," I said. My next stop was the gallery. Just like before, Adrestia opened the door before I could knock. "Please, come into the viewing room," she said. We went inside, and she uncovered the portrait. There was Denise's face, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a silent scream. I could see the car seat she was in, and what appeared to be a swirling cloud outside the window next to her. I followed Adrestia as she carried the portrait to the spot she had reserved for it on her wall. Tears streamed down my face as I watched her hang the painting. I looked around and finally understood what kind of gallery this was. Adrestia turned to me after hanging the portrait. "It really does get easier," she said. She took my head in her hands and the overwhelming urge to grieve vanished. She smiled and kissed my forehead. "Go now. Live, love, and enjoy life. You'll find someone much better. Trust me," she said. I nodded and left the gallery. Denise's funeral was well attended. She had made many friends at the hospital, and most of them were there, along with her parents, who were shocked to learn she had died in a tornado. I accepted the condolences offered, but oddly enough, I felt no need to mourn. I also managed to get through the day without mentioning her infidelity. When the funeral ended, I drove to the gallery but was shocked to see the building was gone. I parked my car and looked at the lot, now overgrown with weeds. I double-checked the address and glanced around but saw no one else. Was it all a dream, I wondered? No, I heard Adrestia's voice say in my head. It was real, she continued in my mind. I nodded and went back home. For some strange reason, I decided to keep the house. There was something peaceful about being out in the country, and to be honest, I enjoyed the night sky. I spent some time removing Denise's presence from the place, giving her belongings to her family members who were good people and still got along well with me. Strangely, about 6 months later, I was in the front room when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find an attractive brunette in a t-shirt and shorts. "Yes," I asked. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Jacobs," she asked. I nodded. "Yes, that's me," I said. "I'm Kirsten Smith, formerly Kirsten Banstead," she replied. "Please come in. What can I do for you? I just wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "Well, it was my husband who died in that car with your wife," she said. "I had nothing to do with that tornado. I don't know why you're thanking me." "I know you didn't cause the tornado. I've wanted to meet you ever since you reviewed my piece at that exhibit in Los Angeles, the one with the country house." Suddenly I remembered. She lifted a box and handed it to me. I took it and invited her inside. "Please, have a seat." "Would you like something to drink?" "A Coke?" "Maybe Coke would be fine," she said. I grabbed her a cold Coke and opened the box. Inside was the picture I had reviewed the day I met Denise. "Does it look familiar?" she asked. "Yes, it's the picture I reviewed all those years ago," I said. "Look closer," she urged. I did, and it hit me. It looked remarkably like my house. "Is this?" I started. She smiled. "I used your house as the model, and I want you to have it." "That's very kind, but why?" I asked. "Well, it's strange. Everyone always put me down for wanting to be an artist, even George. They all said I'd never make it. But then you wrote that kind review. You were the only person who ever said I had talent. I framed your review and hung it next to the picture. After George died, I was going through everything and heard a little voice in my head telling me to give it to you. I thought I was just hearing things, but the voice kept returning even in my dreams, so I finally decided to pack it up and bring it to you." "That's very thoughtful of you. I'll definitely hang it up." "So what are you doing now?" I asked. "Not much of anything," she said. "I don't really need to work anymore now that I have George's money. I've been thinking about painting again." I nodded. "Do you have a place to work?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "Well, there's plenty of space in the building out back. It's got electricity and I can set it up so you can work there if you want to do that," she asked, surprised. "Why not?" "I'm not using it, so it might as well be put to good use," I said. She wrapped her arms around me, thanking me several times. I took her outside and showed her the space. "This would be perfect," she said. "I'll need to install heating and air conditioning. It gets unbearably hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, but I think it could work." "I'll pay you rent for it," she offered. I shook my head. "No need. If you don't mind keeping an eye on the place while I'm gone, that's payment enough." Kirsten practically lived in the workspace I set up for her, and it felt good knowing someone would be around when I was away. We got to know each other well, and I gave her free rein of the property. One thing led to another, and within a few months she was essentially living in the house, and yes, in my bed. A few months later we got married. On our wedding night, I remembered the last thing Adrestia had said to me: "You'll find someone much better. Trust me." And so we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.